And the best way I can describe it is it was this tall, lanky, humanoid-looking figure, but it didn't have like the normal structure of like a person. Like it was shaped weird. It had like super long, spindly arms. It had like a long body.
There's a force in all of us that science knows nothing about. It's fear.
Welcome everyone to Induced Fear. I'm your host Oscar, and with me I have Shayn Jones of Inquiries of Our Reality and Bizarre Encounters. Right? Did I get that right?
Yep, Bizarre Encounters. Bizarre Encounters
Okay.
with Shayn and Oren. Each
With
other
Shayn,
one you want to
okay.
go by, it don't matter. We had an issue where another podcast popped up and started using Bizarre Encounters podcast after we'd been running the show for like a year, or actually it's probably like 2 years. And it was starting to do a thing where like it was messing up some of the feeds on like my account and everything. So I added the with Shayn and Oren just to separate it. But now that show stopped, so we kind of took the name back over. So it's either or Bizarre Encounters with Shayn and Oren. They're both the same.
I just want to make sure I get it right, man. I don't want to mess anything up. Now, we're gonna be doing this back and forth. So you're gonna be on my show for this one, then I'll be hopping onto yours. But what I usually ask everybody when they come on the show is, what brought you into the world, man? I mean, you have 2 shows. So what brought you into this, like, I mean, essentially not crazy as in, you know, you've lost it, but this crazy world of the paranormal and just questioning things about reality itself.
Do you want the long version or do you want the short version?
You can give me the long version, man.
So kind of, I guess, brushing over some of my childhood experiences, and then I'll kind of get into like the main ones that really kind of got the ball rolling and everything with me eventually kind of hopping into the show and everything. But so like starting off as a young kid, man, I had my grandma who was 100% Cherokee. So I grew up with her telling me all these different, like, you know, Sasquatch stories, like 8-man stories, all these folklore stories and everything. So I kind of grew up with all of the folklore stuff kind of lingering around a little bit. And then on top of that, I used to have these like astral projection experiences when I was a kid that I didn't really have any control over. I didn't even know exactly when they started. It was just this like weird thing that I would go to sleep and then I would like wake up essentially, and I would like see myself still sleeping. So I'd be like within my astral form, and I would like basically just be within the same room most of the time. I've had some weirder experiences that I could definitely get into a little bit farther on, but for the most part, it was like I was pretty tethered around my body. And I would always come back and end up getting sleep paralysis directly after. So that's kind of when I started like correlating whether or not I actually had an astral travel experience or if I was just dreaming. Because I would also kind of have these like weird vivid dreams, and I sometimes would be like, all right, am I seeing weird places? Like, is it just a dream? And it always seemed like whenever I had this like extra feeling of like leaving myself, that I would always end up with this sleep paralysis after. So again, that's kind of why I started like correlating it. And it started off where it wasn't anything dark. I kind of just felt like, you know, things were like watching me, but not in a bad way, more like in a curious way. Like, you know, something was watching me just to kind of see what I would do. And as I got a little bit older, some of the experiences started getting a little bit more dark, where I started having like shadow people that would show up. I always specifically had this one that had green eyes that seemed to be a lot bigger than the rest of them, and it would always like watch me as I would come back. But within the experiences, I didn't necessarily like see these shadow people, but I would have these like bizarre things happen where I talked to Vicky Joy Anderson about it a while ago, and she started kind of correlating this whole thing with people that have sleep paralysis experiences and water, and also these like obstacle course type experiences that you'd go through. And one of them that always stuck with me was there was this, it was basically like this wooden obstacle course that was on top of all these like giant boulders and everything in the water. And I was basically just supposed to go through it while I had these like rushing rapids underneath it. And I made it about halfway through, and I ended up slipping, falling in the water, and started getting rushed around underneath this place. And then I smacked a rock, and then that's when I woke up. And it always, like I said, it seemed like I was going through almost like these like tests. And I can kind of connect this possibly with something a little bit later that happened somewhat recently. But these experiences kind of went on up until probably like my early 20s or so, where it would almost be like an every night thing. And then after that, it kind of got to this point where it was a little bit more like spaced out, that it would either it would happen for like, a week at a time in a burst, and then it would stop for like 6 months or whatever. But in the process of when it wasn't happening, like I wouldn't remember like any of my dreams after having all of these like super duper vivid dreams for as far back as I can remember. It all kind of like started stopping for the most part around the time that I was 20. So I always kind of had this weird feeling that something else was there, just because I went through all of these experiences and I'd see these like dark entities and everything. But when it's one of those things you've kind of dealt with forever, it's like, oh yeah, this is a little crazy, and you don't even want to like believe yourself going through this stuff. And especially if you grew up from as early as you can remember having these experiences, it's like it's been happening to you, but it's happening so much that it's just kind of sits in the back of your mind, and you still like question it, even though it's something that you somewhat regularly end up going through. So yeah, always kind of had this like background feeling of something like weird going on in this reality, that things aren't exactly as they appear, and that, things need to be questioned to try to figure this stuff out. And that's kind of where I kind of came to, like, I'm a very logically minded person where, I make some ridiculous claims, but there's these step-by-step facts that I'll use to kind of get to that point. So I try to connect everything as much rationally as I possibly can to try to get into the point where things start really getting bizarre, because I feel like that's really like the only way to really get to a good spot with the research, where you can't just say every bump in the night is a ghost. You kind of have to eliminate everything that's completely rational. When you get to a point when there's nothing rational anymore, then that's when you know that more than likely you have something that's definitely worth investigating. So always kind of had that sitting in the back of my mind. And when I had met my girlfriend, which was the time that I'm currently with still, when I was around 19, she was a photographer, still is. And I was somebody who, again, always kind of had these fascinations with the weird, the bizarre, some oddities and everything. So we ended up getting into like urban exploring, because that ended up being one of those things that was a little bit of what she liked, because she likes taking pictures of all these like old beat up buildings. And I kind of like the spooky, like paranormal kind of side to everything with it. And on top of that, I mean, just being a guy, it's fun to go through these like old decrepit, like abandoned buildings and feel like you're Indiana Jones or something, like digging through piles of like old books and everything you end up finding in these places and stuff. So we ended up finding this place called Northville Psychiatric Hospital that's in Northville, Michigan. And this place is like not just a hospital, but like it's an 8-story hospital. It's got like a full campus around it. It's got like dorms. It's got gymnasiums. It's got a church. It's got a little bit of everything. It's basically like a little, like hospital complex, because it was a hospital complex for like the mentally ill at the time. And of course, everybody kind of knows, especially going back to the 80s and prior, that there's a very tumultuous history with anybody with mental illness and being inside of these types of places. And we always heard these like stories from this place about like, locals and stuff seeing like patients run off, and people would go down chasing them, and they'd end up like strapping them down, bringing them back to this place. Like all these crazy stories that you end up hearing from around these psychiatric hospitals. So, we figured, well, not a perfect place to go and explore. So first time we had went, this was before I really, really started diving into like the paranormal, the rules of how you're supposed to go about things, because, I go and tell this story on shows. People are like, why would you do that? And now it's like, I would never do that. But back then I didn't know any better. I was just almost trying to like invoke something, I guess, to see if something would happen. Like I was a little bit less like careful with it, because I believed
to see something.
Yes, I believed, but I was still like needed to prove something to myself because of growing up with these experiences and everything. So the first time we had went, nothing really crazy happened. You take photography in, you get the orbs and everything, but in some of these old buildings, it's like, I always kind of sit on the fence of like, is it an orb? Is it a dust? Is it just a particle of dust that you happen to catch in the picture? I'm not saying orbs don't exist, but I always kind of question it when I'm the one taking the pictures, because again, I just try to think rationally about this stuff. Otherwise, every single orb is going to be a ghost, and then what's the fun in that? You want to get somewhere with it. So, going to this place the first time, I ended up finding a no smoking sign that I thought was pretty cool. So I ended up popping it off the wall. And I also found, this is the weird part, man, I found this little tiki head that looked like it was made out of foam, and it was like hand painted, and it was just shoved like in a corner somewhere in this place. And the best thing I could relate it to was that, considering it was a mental hospital, they're not giving people wood or knives or anything like that to do arts and crafts with. So assumably, give them a chunk of foam, give them like a butter knife or something. You could probably scrape some stuff out, end up painting on it and stuff. So I assumed that more than likely it was probably something that was made by a patient at one point. So I was like, Awesome. Super cool. I got to bring this home with me.
Yeah.
So we end up going home that night, and I have that sign, and I have that weird little tiki head. And when you first walk into the door, it's one of those houses where you have the front room area, you have the kitchen, but there's two doorways on either side, so it's almost like a continuous loop. So we go upstairs, that's up at the corner, put our backpacks and everything upstairs. We end up coming back down, and when we go back downstairs, my girlfriend goes to walk into the kitchen to go grab a snack, and I'm standing at the base of the stairs. As she walks past to go get a snack, we see this dark, shadowy figure sitting on the couch. Like, it was pitch black in the room, but this thing was like typical shadow person motif where it's darker than dark, and you can see the shape of a person. And we're both making direct eye contact with this thing. And she had one of those like moments of fear where you just straight beeline, where she's looking at it, but she walks straight past it, like almost like ignoring like it wasn't there. Like, you just react at that point. So then she ends up looping around, and I'm standing at the stairs still. She looks at me and she goes, "You saw that, right?" And I go, "Yeah, I definitely saw that." And we turn back over and the thing was gone. So then I was like, all right, maybe I shouldn't have taken some stuff home with me from this place. So later on that night, I'm usually like a night owl. I end up staying up for a while. So, I'm up in bed, I'm watching TV. My girlfriend falls asleep, while I'm watching TV and everything. And I end up hearing in the hallway this like footsteps. And then I hear doo doo doo, boom. And it sounds like somebody gets pushed down the stairs. And as I hear that noise, she ends up springing up and she goes, "Holy crap." And I'm like, "What?" And she goes, "I just had a dream that somebody pushed me down the stairs." I'm like, "That's crazy because I just heard somebody fall down the stairs."
Yeah, that is crazy.
So I started kind of telling her a little bit about like my experiences and everything. And before that, I hadn't really had any like doorway to really like open this stuff up because, you just start talking to a girl and everything. You're not trying to show them like your crazy side yet, So, I at that point basically had to tell her like my full childhood experiences growing up, all these astral travel experiences and everything. And I kind of wondered if, because I did it so strongly for a while, that if I was like sleeping next to somebody, if they might have some of these experiences. Because back when I was in high school and, everybody has sleepovers and stuff, there was like maybe one or two times that I had friends that were with us that ended up saying that like, "Whoa, I had this weird dream that, I woke up and I saw you guys sleeping here. It was like I never left the room and I could see myself sleeping." And at that point, I wasn't trying to make people think I was crazy. So I was just like, "Whoa, man, that's a crazy dream." But after I had that experience with her, it's like I really started questioning whether or not like people might be able to pass this, or if there's just something with the energy, maybe that it's just like if you're near that person, that it just kind of disrupts the energy a little bit and makes it so that, people that normally wouldn't astral project might end up astral projecting. So, I mean, that was definitely a weird thing that I tried to like explain to her, not really knowing like where her context was with it, like if she was going to think I was completely crazy after this. So after that, I started telling her about like the tiki head and the no smoking sign. And I was like, we should probably get rid of these things. And she's like, "Yeah, probably be a good idea." So we ended up going back there and ended up dropping those things back off. And it ended up starting this big fascination where we ended up wanting to go there almost every weekend. And we got to the point where like we completely mapped this place out. We knew every single building. We knew where all of these like really supposedly haunted places were. We found like the church where everybody talks about this like weird pile of books that like has like fungus and everything like growing out of it. And people claim that they have weird experiences and everything in that room. Like they have this thing where like half the doors are like welded shut. So you have to like know what areas you can like cross through to get into like certain sections of the hospital and everything. Cause literally right next door to the campus of this place is a police station. So, we had this place mapped out, and at the same time, we'd be like sitting up on the roof and we'd be watching like cops come in and like arrest people for coming into this place. But, we're smart enough to never actually park there. Yeah. And actually, fun side story. Have you ever heard of the movie It Follows?
Yeah.
So do you know that scene where she first gets the thing transferred over to her, where she's like hooking up with the guy in the back of the car, and there's this parking lot with a building and there's like grass growing in the parking lot? It's like where they first like hook up, where she gets the thing passed to her. That is literally Northville. That is the back entrance, and that is like where we would go in at. I've been waiting for an opportunity to say this on the show, but that was filmed at Northville Psychiatric Hospital. So that's the exact spot that I'm talking about.
Okay, cool.
But so going to this place all the time, we had a handful of kind of weird experiences that kind of lead into this bigger experience. But one of the first paranormal ones before I get into like the meat and potatoes of what really pushed me into doing all this type of stuff. We were on this floor where all the windows weren't shattered, surprisingly, and there was this blue door with a big smiley face on it. And we were just kind of checking out the building, not being too loud, not running around, just kind of, being respectably checking out the building. And this door just dead slammed shut, and it scared the crap out of all of us. And right after that, we like freeze to see if we hear like footsteps, like anybody messing around or anything in there, to see if somebody was messing with us. And we didn't hear any footsteps, didn't hear nothing. We ended up going into that room, opening the door, don't see anybody in there, leave the door wide open, and we all just sat for a while just to see if it would like slam shut, because it sounded like somebody like slammed the door as hard as they possibly could. And we couldn't get it to like happen again. So we took that as maybe we might actually have something with this. So leading into like the main experience, I don't know if this necessarily plays a part in it, but I think it might. So I always try to include this in there because it was definitely out of place. But it was one of the days that we were there, and we were up on, I believe, the 3rd floor. And we're looking down into the back where that courtyard is that I just talked about with the whole It Follows thing. And there's like a tree line that's right there. And there's like a little tiny patch of woods. And we're peeking back there, and we watched this cougar walk out. And it straight up looked up at us, and then it slunk back in. And I was with my girlfriend and her friend. My girlfriend's friend and I both saw this thing. And she was like, "You saw that, right?" And I'm like, "Yeah, that was a cougar." She goes, "That's what I thought it was." And we live in, southeastern Michigan. It's like, there may be cougars, but there's nowhere near, no cougars anywhere near the city. So it like made no sense for this thing to be there. And looking into the background of it, there was never like a body or anything found to this. There was like a handful of people who reported cougar sightings in Northville around that time, which I believe was around 2013, 2014, if anybody wants to look into it. There's a few news articles you can get to pop up on it. But yeah, the carcass was never found for this thing. They never figured out where it supposedly came from, but people supposedly saw it near, again, this patch of woods at Northville. And kind of leading into like the main thing here now. So after checking this place out so many times, we got to a point where it was like, we've seen everything, we've done everything now, but there's these things underneath called the Northville tunnels. And what these used to be were like access tunnels back in the day for, sometimes they would transfer patients. They would use it for basically just access tunnels. I'm sure like down on if you get into certain areas of it, I'm sure that there's like old plumbing and like electrical stuff, but at least near the hospital it was mainly just like transport tunnels and stuff. But I believe that actually, I have a book about it. Linda Godfrey actually wrote a Weird Michigan book, and she references Northville and these tunnels. If anybody wants to get a little bit of a backstory on it, there was supposedly some like occult murders there back in the 80s and everything. But so it's like just really, really dark, really creepy, like really, really thick, weird presence to this place. So we never really went down there just because of the fact of we didn't want to get like a mile in, for example, and then run out of flashlight batteries and then have to scale the wall the entire way back. Because even if you went during the day, like it's pitch black down there. Like you're not gonna be able to see nothing. So we said, all right, we're gonna just go a little bit into there just to check it out, see what it's all about, because everybody talks about how creepy they are. So we end up going in through the morgue on the one side of the building. You go straight through, and then there's a staircase that goes down into the basement of the hospital that gets into some some access points for the Northville tunnels. And this was a different point that we'd never gone into the basement before, because normally we'd come through on like the main entrance of the basement over on the one side. So we ended up taking this like side entrance also just to kind of check out something a little bit different. So I ended up getting down the stairs into the basement, and to my right side, there's this brick wall that looks like, not like somebody knocked it out, but somebody purposefully like removed bricks to make like a doorway. But it wasn't like a perfect doorway. It was like the staggered kind of brick look to it. But it looked like somebody had done it professionally. It wasn't like, there was like a bunch of teenagers that just knocked the wall out one day. Like it looks like they purposely removed it at one point. So I'm like, all right, cool. Let's go check that out. So I go walking down the stairs, turn to the right into that room, and I have my girlfriend and I have her friend with us. And as soon as I walk into this room, to my right side, I hear this like disembodied voice that tells me, "Run," in my ear. And as I hear that, I'm looking forward, and there's this like metal cart. It's like one of the hospital like hallway like girdy looking carts. And I start to see this thing that goes to stand up. And the best way I can describe it is it was this tall, lanky, humanoid looking figure. but it didn't have like the normal structure of like a person. Like it was shaped weird. It had like super long spindly arms, it had like a long body, and its flesh was like this grayish blue kind of like decaying color. And it had this black, long, slicked back, gross looking hair on the top of its head. And I didn't end up getting to see this thing's face, but it stood up. And as soon as I saw that, I ended up taking off out of the building. I had my girlfriend and her friend with me, and I didn't tell them what I saw. I didn't tell them nothing. I just took off outside of the building. And my main focal point was that, like, I didn't want to scare them. I just wanted to get them out of the building safely, because I don't know what the hell I just experienced, because nobody was to my one side. And then I see this thing that is clearly shaped like a human, but not a human. And, you know, the first couple things that go through your mind are like, you know, maybe like a crackhead or something down there, maybe like a homeless person. But I'll tell you what, dude, like no homeless person was shaped like that. And I have never to this day seen anybody that has skin color that's like this gray, decaying, like bluish color. Like it was bizarre to say the least. So as we're running out of this place, my girlfriend, again, being a photographer, ends up snapping some pictures, not knowing like what I saw, what had happened, nothing. And she ended up capturing some pictures of this thing, and I can send them to you after the show if you remind me, but it almost looked like an apparition, which was the ultra weird part about it, because we have like the main dark photo, and we have one that we just lightened up a little bit so you can see it better, but it's fully transparent. Like you can see through this thing, but it's exactly like the thing that I saw. You can see the long black hair on the top of its head. So like after this experience, man, like I couldn't deny that there was definitely something weird. And I didn't know like where to place this. So I just started doing some research, trying to look up possibly what I had seen. And anytime I looked anything up, I'd always come back to Wendigo. But it didn't look like how people would describe the Wendigo. It looked more like how people were describing like a rake or like a pale crawler or something like that. So it kind of led me into a little bit farther with the research, where I started getting back into like the native descriptions of like Wendigos, and they never described them as these like deer-headed, like antlered beings. They described them as almost like these zombie-like looking things that would like eat their lips off to the point where they would, because they have so much hunger, they would end up eating their own lips. And they, again, would describe them more as like these zombie-like kind of looking figures. So trying to connect stuff, I was like, all right, so I have the visuals of this, but it seems like I have the representation of this. Even down to the fact of, like, when you start looking into the folklore, they would talk about with Wendigos, you weren't safe from the first snowfall to the last snowfall. And they would also talk about how during the warm summer months that they would end up going underground or going into caves or going somewhere that's specifically, like, cold. And those tunnels were a good, like, 20, 30 degrees, I swear, colder than the buildings upstairs. So it made sense with that sitting point to it. So I got to a point where I feel like a lot of information basically got cluttered and mixed up. And what my theory is on it is that when you start getting into the settlers coming across and like retelling like the Native American stories and talking about their sacred areas, all this type of stuff, they start putting this like demonic point to it where, you know, you'll have something that's sacred to the natives and they would call it like the devil's tea kettle or the devil's this or the devil's that.
Yeah.
And they just start doing this like demonizing of like these stories and cultures because, you know, they kind of view it as like pagan, so it's essentially demonic from their viewpoint at that point. So what I had assumed was that they had heard stories, and as the settlers came through, they started retelling these stories and putting their demonic, like pagan twist onto it, where you hear about this thing that essentially would be described to them as like almost like a demon. So they started adding these like demonic features to it where, you know, first they add the deer skull, and then they start adding the antlers to kind of reminisce of like horns and everything, and then you get to a point where it becomes such a toss-up of folklore that nobody knows where the root is anymore. And then, you know, you don't hear about anybody like really seeing these like Wendigos like how people think that they look. And if they do, I generally think that it might be something else that's taking the image of something that you might be familiar with. But then I started getting into the side thing where it seemed like there was a cutoff where when Wendigo experiences kind of stopped being talked about, that's when like all of a sudden there's this uprise of like the rake and like the pale crawler. And what I think had happened was that basically the whole idea of the Wendigo got destroyed by folklore and retelling of the story, where it became this straight up like folklore tale. But people were still seeing these weird things, so they started creating this new name for it because their image of it wasn't exactly what it was anymore. So I think that the whole idea of like Wendigo or Wendigo, pale crawler, rake, it's all the same thing. It's just people started giving a new name because the image had changed because of the folklore from it. So when I started connecting all of these like weird dots and everything, on top of always questioning everything, on top of always being like a conspiracy theorist, and just kind of realizing that I might actually be able to contribute a little bit of something to the research. And, listening to podcasts, I noticed that, people would ask different questions than I would ask because, I guess I just think a little bit differently than, maybe some people might. And I guess that's kind of what you want to go for. If you think a little bit differently, you might as well try to do something with it. So kind of connecting everything, it ended up leading into me starting up this show because I started questioning things more after this experience. And when I first started my show, I didn't even end up coming out and really talking about this experience until 6 months after, because I didn't want to be that podcaster that pops up and has this like crazy story. Like, I wanted people to actually take me seriously and realize that I try to come at things rationally, where at this point, I'm not saying it was a Wendigo. I say, like, with my research, that's what I've come to, but I'm always happy to hear other suggestions that people might have, because at the end of the day, I think it's something that I'll never fully figure out, but at least that's where my research has led. So if anybody has any other viewpoints on it, like I said, I'm always happy to hear it. But it ended up leading into me doing my show, questioning everything, and it got me to a point where I realized that I could hopefully create a platform where if people have had these weird experiences, they don't know where to share them at, they want somebody to just be a listening ear for it, I could create that platform for somebody and not do the typical, like, blowing up the story, making it more than what it is. Like, when I have a guest that comes on, I try to help them, like, hit every rational point. And then if, there's no rational explanation for it, then we know we got something with it. But on the other side, not, putting down their experience, saying that anything that they said is wrong. I just try to eliminate anything that could be more real world to get to, like, the root point of it. And then in turn, again, always be that listening ear for everybody. And it's just kind of stemmed out from there, where it started off with interviews, and then it started turning into me more so deep diving into my own stuff, which kind of stemmed into Bizarre Encounters. And I've just kind of been riding the train ever since, of just researching, digging into weird stuff, and again, trying to hopefully figure out my experiences. But at the end of the day, man, and I don't think it's one of those things we'll ever fully figure out, or, we're not necessarily supposed to, because it's something that's beyond what humans are possibly supposed to know. Maybe on the other side, but we'll figure it out.
Yeah, once you start digging, it's like there's no way there's going to be, you're never going to reach the bottom of it. You're going to end up finding, oh, well, now I have to question this. And now I have to question this. Now what does this mean? Now what does this mean? And then you just keep digging more and more and more as you get into this world. Because like you said, when it came to seeing what this thing was, you're not just dead set on it being a Wendigo. You're like, it could be something else. At the end of the day, you don't know. So you're just going to keep digging and looking and seeing if anything else connects, and if anybody else has any experience that kind of matches yours, but their research led them down a different path.
See, I can sometimes go to the like shapeshifter concept, but I feel like I kind of view that a little bit different than most people would when they hear shapeshifter. I'm sure most people kind of get the idea of something physically like changing its actual form, where when it comes to shapeshifters, for me, like whether it's a reptilian, skinwalker, anything like that, I don't think that these things are necessarily like fully changing forms. I think that it's this occult understanding of how to change other people's perception, where you're not physically changing, but somebody is seeing something different than what there was actually present in front of them. And I feel like there's enough like of these weird little sleight of hand tricks that there's probably something to it, and it's just some of that occult knowledge that people hide. And that's why you hear about, like, skinwalkers being shamans, and reptilians being this interdimensional, like, other undescribable being type of thing. And I've heard some like weird stories with like reptilians where, in a group, nobody can tell there's a reptilian, but you get them one-on-one, then you start noticing these like weird little cutouts and features and everything. And I've actually had my own reptilian experience I could probably share at some point. But I think that the whole shapeshifter concept, they have a way to manipulate the mind to see what they want you to see, but they're not physically changing form. It's rather like another layer over top of it. So kind of going with that, I mean, that's where I feel like the whole cougar thing could possibly mix in, because there was a few random deaths at this place of people like falling down the elevator shafts, but the elevator doors were almost completely shut. So unless somebody shoved themselves through there, like, it doesn't really make any sense. So, I mean, maybe this thing just takes the form of whatever happens to like scare that specific person.
Yeah.
I don't know, because I don't know if you know specifically what it is, but if you have somebody living there that has this understanding, possibly has some like shamanic backgrounds or something like that, or whatever, I mean, I don't outrule the possibility of a shapeshifter from the perspective of they're not actually physically changing their form, but rather like layering over and changing perception.
Yeah, it's just like a projection of some kind.
Exactly.
Yeah, because that's what I think of when it comes to like dogman sightings a lot. Because most of the time when people have their encounters with a dogman, it's a high fear in that moment, and just when they think like this is going to be the end of it, then it's just all gone. It's just like this very heightened point of fear before everything just stops. So
those might be the lucky ones, because the dogman stuff, I've heard some like crazy stories. I mean, those things definitely seem like they're way more aggressive than most stuff. And I've heard of a few people putting shots into these things. Like, I don't know. I feel like you probably got lucky if you got one of these things to back up for it, because for the most part, you know, how many missing 411 stories are there? Or how many like people have been killed in parks where they say it just looked like they got attacked by like a bear or some kind of animal or something like that? I feel like there's a lot of really easy things to cover up with other stuff, and there might be a lot more dogman face-to-face encounters out there that people weren't so lucky to make it through.
Yeah, because we had one out here where I am in Colorado, not too far from where I live, and basically the person heard it running towards them, running on all fours, and then it jumped over a fence, landed right next to them, and then continued to run on two legs the rest of the way. And that was it with the encounter. There was nothing. It didn't attack them in any way. It didn't even bother looking at them. It just ran towards their direction, jumped the fence, landed on two legs, and then just continued to run the rest of the way.
You want to hear something really, really weird? Digging into Dogman from Michigan, because for anybody that may not be familiar, Michigan Dogman is like a huge thing where it's like this whole side of the state is the Manistee, and people have all these different sightings of these things and stuff. But there was a weird one that I came across when I was doing Dogman research for a 3-part episode for Bizarre Encounters, and it was this phone call where it was an OnStar phone call, and everybody says like one side of it sounds scripted, but in all fairness, like OnStar has a script. Like that's the side that you're going to expect is going to sound scripted, but the other side is where you like really get people's emotions, like what they're really feeling during these experiences. And one of these calls that I came across was basically this OnStar call of these people who had seen something run past the road. They end up swerving off into the ditch, and they're on an OnStar call with somebody basically trying to tell them what happened in the situation. And towards the end, they were talking about, oh, it's coming back, and you hear somebody in the back seat that starts like freaking out and screaming, and then you hear like basically this giant roar and a bunch of screaming, and then everything shuts off, and you hear the OnStar person like, hello, 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 and then it stops. So when I started digging into it, supposedly this call came from Troy, Michigan, and the more I dig into it, the more stuff kind of got weird with it, where I would find a page of this recording on it, and then I'd go to like show somebody, and the page would be gone. And I go find another page with it on it, and then it would go and it would be gone again. So I got to the point where I found it, I ended up recording it to make sure I always had it, and then again it like disappeared, where I can only find it at certain times when people post it. But on the other side of it, the following year, supposedly after this had happened and this recording happened, OnStar did this Halloween fun werewolf attack like phone call. So like when you look it up, there's this very scripted, like goofy satire werewolf attacking somebody on an OnStar call, and every single time you'd go to look it up again, it would end up going back to this thing. So I feel like it was one of those, it was one of those weird cover-ups where they had this call that was floating around, so they ended up creating another call so it would blend with it, and people would think it was like a Halloween joke. But I mean, why would it be scrubbed off of so many websites if there wasn't something to it? And it's super split, where I'll show people this, and like I said, there's the half that thinks it's completely like scripted, and then the other side, it's like, I don't know, I'm one of those people that doing the show, like I've talked to enough people, I can hear like impressions and voices, I can hear emotion. You could tell like when somebody's acting something out. And when I listen to this, like I got this like really deep pit feeling in the pit of my stomach, and it just felt super duper real, like the people's emotions, their fear. And I think it was something. It was some type of encounter, and more than likely, these people probably got destroyed by a dog man, and they weren't the ones that were able to tell the tale. But if you get rid of the one side, it's super easy to do a cover up on this thing. And I don't think it was necessarily like all OnStar, but rather it was like, all right, we had something weird happen. We're just gonna pretend like this didn't happen, so there's no witnesses to it. But yeah, dude, the more you dig into it, man, it's like I feel like there's a lot more aggressive encounters. It's just that
I've heard of the ones where they slash people's vehicles and there's like claw marks in the car.
I've had people come on the show and say that they've had like government officials like talk to them after like having sightings of these things and stuff. And one of the truckers in Michigan, he shot one of these things supposedly 2 times in the face and watched it roll into the ditch. And he was getting all these like weird phone calls of them saying like, well, you damaged our property. You're going to be held responsible for it. And he didn't know like who was on the other end or anything. So specifically like Dogman, with a lot of this phenomenon, like UFOs, for example, is another prime example. Dogman, I think is one of those multifaceted phenomenon where it's not just one particular thing, because everybody talks about hearing these like metal doors and stuff before Dogman attack. So I've kind of wondered if there's a big portion of that where it's possibly some type of like genetic splicing, or possibly something where, I mean, shit, dude, we're cloning sheeps back in the 90s. Like, imagine where the technology is now, like 30 years later, where people are popping up with these like Dogman sightings. So I think there's just a bigger cover up for Dogman, because there is the natural Dogman, which inspired them to do this research. And then on the other side, there's either one controlled Dogman that they've tried to like possibly capture and essentially treat like a dog to see if it will train and do these things, or one that they somehow created through gene splicing. Because I mean, shit, dude, that's the ultimate weapon. You drop that thing down on a military base, it destroys everybody, and even if it gets taken out in the process, I mean, nothing comes back to you, because it's like, oh, you saw a fucking Dogman, like, whoop-de-doo, like, how do you know that wasn't us? Like, you sound crazy. Like, there's no Dogman out here. What do you mean?
Well, I mean, that's what they did for what is it, for the German Shepherd, right? They thought it was like a wolf or something like that in the middle of this war zone, but it was a dog they have never seen before that was trained to go and attack people in these war zones, and people wouldn't be able to see it because it was this trained dog that knew how to get around and attack, and they considered it to be this beast that was just taking out the soldiers. So I mean, it could be something government.
I mean, continuing from the Nazi stuff, I think the Nazis are a big portion of what the UFO phenomenon is continued Nazi experiments after the Geneva Convention, where you couldn't do that kind of shit, so you have to hide it. And I think it also kind of connects in with the LSD stuff, where it was this compilation of things where you had like, the Germans that are doing all of these weird experiments and everything on people to try to figure out like the psyche of man, to see if like astral projection, all these like metaphysical things are definitely possible. And then you had the U.S. government that ended up doing Operation Paperclip. We picked our Nazi scientists that we wanted. And then right after that was when we had this like upspike of, science fiction popping out, and MK Ultra experiments were starting, and they were trying to like lay this idea within the human consciousness. And then to continue these experiments, like my theory that I've connected to, and I ended up doing like a 1.5-hour episode trying to connect all these specific pieces with it. But essentially they're using the LSD to manipulate people's perceptions into thinking that they're seeing aliens, but they're actually continuing all these weird, black budget program operations to see like, what's going to happen if we put people in these certain conditions, or we try these specific experiments and everything on people. And like, the more you dive into like UFO abductions, man, like there are so many encounters where people have described seeing what looks like a mask line on one of the people that's in like the operating room. So like, that's where all of my stuff started connecting with this, is like, if they were already doing like experiments with LSD, mind control, all of these like advanced things that I'm sure that most people aren't even aware about, that are like way past LSD, like significantly stronger, probably for like shorter durations. It doesn't seem out of the context to think that, they might be abducting people to run experiments, and that's why they have this fascination with specific family lines or specific genetics and all this shit. And I'm not saying the UFO phenomenon ain't happening, but I'm saying like, it's a perfect cover-up. If you already have this weird phenomenon that's happening, if you also disguise yourself to do your agenda underneath this operation, I mean, it's definitely plausible, man. I think that there's a good portion of the phenomenon that's actually human-based, and that seems to be where I get to a lot of this stuff. I think that there's stuff that happens in our reality that is unexplainable, So we end up trying to figure out how to harness that for ourselves. So then we end up creating this second side to almost every phenomenon where it's like the dogman stuff. I think that there's these weird dogmen that people are seeing, and on the other side, I think that there's also these recreated dogmen. And, I think there's real UFO experiences, but on the flip side, I think there's recreated UFO experiences because it's a continued agenda, man. And that's always the ones you got to worry about.
That. Yeah.
Because that's when they start coming after you and asking questions, and people start having these like weird, all blacked out cars with no lettering or anything on them experiences of people saying like, get out of the area, stuff like that. It's never happens with Dogman or with Sasquatch. It's always out when you're looking for Dogman that people talk about weird sightings of people too.
Yeah. I think the only other time was when, what was it? The mountain that erupted.
St. Helen?
Yeah. Yes. Thank you. That was the only time that I can think of that the government was even involved in anything when it came to like Bigfoot, Sasquatch-esque. They were like there's people saying that they took bodies of these creatures, and then that was it. But other than that, you don't really have those incidents where somebody has a sighting of a Sasquatch and then the government's like, hey, you didn't see that. And if you talk about it, there's going to be trouble.
Well, the weird part about that, too, is, like, that's where all the Bat Squatch sightings came from. And the weird part about the Bat Squatch sightings, at least, like, the very first one that kind of started it all was this guy made reference to the fact that this thing, like, landed and all his, like, truck stopped working. Like, all of his, like, mechanics stopped working. So, like you were saying, the government connection into things, like, people want to call it a Bat Squatch, but, like, could it have been something else? Because it was definitely interfering with technology. So that kind of brings in like a whole other government tie to this thing, that if you're trying to create these monsters that you could basically just drop onto a base, it would make sense to completely block out all communication in the process. I mean, two birds, one stone, right?
Yeah.
Or if you know something's weird in the area, then you turn everything off so nobody can take pictures and try to report on it more.
Oh yeah, especially if they're monitoring whatever they created. They're like, nobody can take pictures of this. Nobody can even call for help at this point. Whatever happens to them happens to them.
Yeah, and you just, I don't know what happened, man. Like, it's a weird creature. Like, I don't know, man. That's not real. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
Perfect cover-up. You just deny all possibilities that it might be you.
Yeah. Yeah, and then come up with, names for people to make it seem like they're crazy. Like when they came up with just the term conspiracy theorists or tinfoil hat, it's all to take the focus off of them and say, these people are the ones that are crazy. Don't look over here at us.
Now you got to wear it as a badge of honor. It's kind of nice how that's kind of flipped, where people are like, yeah, I'm a conspiracy theorist. And we're getting to a point in society where it's like stuff's getting so weird that it's like, it's almost like all the weird movies you watch where there's like, that one conspiracy theorist that's like, oh yeah, aliens exist. And everybody's like, oh, you're fucking crazy. And then they start landing and he's like, I told you. And I think everybody's starting to realize that we're getting to that point where, the guy who was always talking about, like, this is what's actually happening, we have all this weird stuff happening. Maybe you should start listening to that guy because he's actually paying attention.
Yeah. Pay attention alongside with him. Listen to him.
It's recognizing patterns, man. At the end of the day, it's not, there are people that just throw some crazy stuff at the wall and hope it sticks. But, the majority of people that are, quote, conspiracy theorists is like they're really good at pattern recognition and they'll connect things. And the more you actually listen to them, you realize that it's not like they're just out of nowhere throwing an idea. Like they have these connecting pieces that get to this point. It's just that a lot of people that are, quote, conspiracy theorists, podcasters, we've kind of gotten to the point where a lot of us kind of know how to like inch people into the conversation. But, if you have this crazy thing that you heard that you've connected the dots between, it's like you want to go out and give people like the bomb information, not realizing that it's like you can't drop the bomb at first. You have to build up to the bomb. Otherwise, if you drop the bomb, people are like, how the hell did you get to this point?
Yeah. All we were talking about was the drones, and now we're talking about like it could be the government involvement, Project Bluebeam. Like, what even is that?
Dude, as soon as I started seeing the Cali fires, man, like I didn't even check out any other pages on this stuff, and I'm sure that everybody came to the same idea that you got to burn the city down in order to rebuild it. And getting into some like political stuff, man, like they had the issue with like a ridiculous amount of homeless people over there. You have all the Hollywood elite over there. all this kind of stuff. So you start combining all these factors, and then it's like, you have all the stuff that's happening now with like the insurance companies where they're not wanting to like insure houses and stuff like that in California or LA anymore. So I see this pivot where they I feel like they burn the city down intentionally, trying to push everybody out because they know that the only people that are going to be able to rebuild there are people that have enough money that it doesn't matter if they have insurance. So essentially they can rebuild the city. And at this point, I mean, everybody's kind of seeing with P. Diddy, and it's starting to kind of come out to the main fold that there's this whole underground pedophilia, dark, weird, like elite to Hollywood. So I definitely think it's possible that everybody's theorized about these tunnels, like all this kind of stuff. But if you destroy the infrastructure, you can essentially like rebuild these tunnels. And, maybe they've been around for so long that they got to a point where they're starting to like fall apart, and they're like, all right, we need to rebuild this stuff, but we can't draw attention to ourselves.
Yeah.
We need to just burn it down and like restart all of this stuff. And
Especially
I mean,
with smart LA, the smart
yeah,
LA
dude.
city. Yeah.
And if you see Cemex that gets involved, that specific company, dude, they got some weird backing to them where like they have Rothschilds interconnected with them, and they were actually one of the places that got the cement contract for Haiti. And for anybody that dives into this weird stuff, I mean, more sex trafficking comes out of Haiti than anywhere else. And right above Haiti are all these like elite islands and everything. And you start connecting into like this other issue Cemex had in the U.S. where somebody had found this area at one of their old facilities where it looked like they would like stage people to be trafficked. So they put out this whole thing on all their pages saying like, we do everything in our power to make sure that, we are fighting this issue with sex trafficking and blah, 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 blah. But then it's like, all right, so you're doing the cement and you're rebuilding the infrastructure in Haiti, which is one of the top places that happens, and you're connected with the Rothschilds. I'm going to assume that you're probably building some tunnels for easier access. And if you guys get involved in California, I'll be right up on top of you guys. Like I know some X's games. I know what you're playing.
my fiance about it. I was like, yeah, they want to do like an AI, like a smart city AI fueled type of city, and she was like, well, why would they have to burn it? And I was like, well, because
how much it costs to tear everything down.
Yeah, plus
you just burn it all down.
Get rid of old history. You want to get rid of the older buildings, the things that have history attached to them. So I know there were like a ton of historic buildings that burned, right?
Yeah.
In this fire. Yeah. Yep. So I was like, you want to get rid of old history so you can have more of the narrative going forward.
Exactly. And get rid of all of like there's no tunnels under LA anymore. It all burned down. So even if there was, they're not there anymore. Until, 100 years from now, they got to reburn them down and rebuild them again.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm sorry. We went off on a tangent on that end. But
I told you I free flow too much, man. I get going onto a corner and I just keep going with it.
I'm completely fine with it. I just didn't want to miss any of your experiences yourself, because I can talk about, when it comes to conspiracy things, like I can go on that for hours.
I don't typically guess too much. So on the other side, it's like, I always try to figure that some of the easiest podcasts are the ones where like you let somebody go and then they just kind of go. So I end up like getting into this rap where I just end up going and I end up ranting. I realize that I like told my story for like a half hour straight. So my apologies, man.
No, you're good, man. You're completely fine. The conversation is good nonetheless. I just, when you had said things about sleep paralysis, because those are what I've had my experiences a lot with too. But when you also brought up reptilian encounter, I was like, all right, I'm gonna have to hear these things.
I'm glad you brought it up, because I almost forgot to double back to tell you about that.
Yeah, I clicked right in my brain when you said it. I was like, I'm gonna have to hear this.
So it wasn't anything super duper crazy, but still enough that it kind of like solidified the weirdness of this within my mind and kind of got me to that point where I was saying with like shapeshifters that I think it's like a layer. So it was like maybe 6 months after I started my podcast up. It was during, all the lockdown and all that kind of fun stuff going on. So I'm at Myers with my girlfriend, and I'm in line, doing my typical, quote, conspiracy theorist thing, ranting about whatever. And I get on some rants about reptilians, and I'm just talking about reptilians with my girlfriend in like the checkout line at the grocery store. And when I'm in the middle of this, I turn back, and there's this lady, and she's staring at me like directly. And she turns even more and looks right at me, and she grabs her mask down. She pulls it down, and I see this layer of like reptilian skin that almost looks like it was like blanketing over her face, like almost like a double image is like the best way to describe it. Like you could see her human face, and then there was this like layered face of like this reptilian face on top of it. So then she ends up pulling her mask up, turns back to her husband, and just starts talking to him again like nothing ever happened. And after that, I was like, dude, like, I don't know what I just saw. I don't know if I saw exactly what I saw. Like, it was just, it totally messed me up for a minute where I was just like, did I see what I think I just saw? And then I started kind of diving into the more of the reptilian concept, where I have heard this concept now of the reptilians specifically doing this like layer thing where like they make you see what they want you to see. And it all kind of connected the dots for me where like, you know, the reptilian concept seems a bit out there for people, but you know, you have a weird experience like that. And then you're just like, yeah, I could definitely see it, that there might be something that's been here longer than us, or something that came here after us, or something that kind of evolved on like a different like timeline than we did theoretically. And they have this way to like layer stuff up because, you know, we as people, we have these like rubber masks that you almost like can't tell that it's not that person. So it's like, how far off is it before we basically just get to a point where maybe we wear like a hollow projector on our neck, and then you could just hit the button and you have this projection that goes over your face. Like, it may not be as like metaphysical as like, you know, I'm with my mind changing your perception, but rather that there's like, you know, like for the reptilian specifically, that there's some type of like advanced technology that you could use to basically like blanket your image where people can't see what you actually are, and it's some type of like hologram over yourself. But, you know, diving into like skinwalkers, I definitely think that there's something spiritual to that, but definitely a big factor of like they had to wear the skin of that specific animal in order for people to see them as that animal. So I think it was kind of like playing a two-part thing, that they knew how to manipulate people's perception. And then on the other side, it's like you still had to have this like spiritual connection of like killing this animal and wearing its skin in order for this thing to work. So it's like, I think there's two different avenues to get to the same thing. And it seems like with most of this weird stuff you dive into, there seems to be this, for lack of better terms, like natural way of doing it, where you have this ability to do it, or there's something here that causes the ability to do it. And then there's the technological point of getting to it, where, I mean, same as like a trance, you know, you can get to a trance by listening to like frequencies and beats and everything using technology. But on the other side, you can also get into a trance from sitting in the right mindset. So I think like a lot of these weird avenues, there's a technological way to get there, and then, like I said, for lack of a better term, like a natural way to get there.
Yeah, like just to manipulate the vibrations or the energies in that area. The same way that people have encounters with a Sasquatch and they have that infrasound that just stops them in their tracks so they can't move. Like, it would be essentially in that same realm of things, just to kind of change the way you are viewing them and the way you're...
Or even just getting you to a high enough point of fear that it starts manipulating your mind. Like a perfect point with like the skinwalker concept. You know, if you're wearing the skin of an animal, you're moving around like this animal, and you scare somebody to such a high point of fear that it's almost like, you know, somebody will get attacked by a dog and they'll be like, oh, its teeth were massive, this thing was this, because when you're in that moment of fear, your perception gets messed up a little bit. So if you can scare somebody that you're a wolf coming after them, but you're wearing a wolf skin, but you're moving in a weird way that they can't quite make it out, I think you can mess with somebody's mind enough that they think that they saw this like deformed wolf, when realistically it was like a human wearing a wolf skin, and just knowing like how to move exactly to mess with somebody's mind where they can't quite make out what they're seeing. So they just start piecing together what they're seeing in their mind, and then they create this like creature that isn't necessarily in front of them, but they've altered their perception to trick them with a high state of fear so that they're seeing what they want them to see.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense in that sense. When you explain it that way, yeah.
Said I throw these ridiculous claims, then I gotta like get to how I've gotten to that point.
No, it's a good way to break it down. That way it's just not like, okay, so I saw this, and that's why I'm at this conclusion here.
Because otherwise you're leaving all the important details. Like, you know, like I said, I want people to understand why I'm making these ridiculous claims, but
yeah, but that's crazy to have that, like, to be talking about reptilians, and then all of a sudden, you know.
Because it felt like it was like all right, shut your mouth. Like, we're watching you. That's literally what it felt like, and the impression that I got from it.
Yeah, and the mask making it easier for them to hide in that moment, too.
Exactly.
Well, hide until it showed itself to you.
Because what other reason would she have had to just turn around and, like, pull her mask down to show me her face? Like, just a layer on top. Like, I was in a brightly lit grocery store. It wasn't like it was like a trick of the lights, Like nothing like that. It was like, for anybody that's not from Michigan, Myers is like, you know, a Kroger or like a Walmart, or like, I don't know exactly how far they
Yeah.
reach, but it's like a giant, not local, brightly lit grocery store. Like there wouldn't have been like a confusion of light where it would have looked like reptilian skin on this woman's face. She wasn't wearing like a hat where there was a shadow or nothing. Like it was just straight face and light. Like I saw what I saw, and I still can't fully explain it to this day, but I've tried to rationalize it. And, you know, from the way I've kind of explained everything, like I'm open to ideas, but that's where I'm sitting at, and that's kind of where I came to with it currently.
I mean, man, those are always, I think those are the best experiences when it kind of breaks your brain a little bit. And you're like, "Whoa, shit! What just happened? What just happened? I don't know what's going on right now." Like your mind kind of just gets scrambled in that moment of just like, I don't know how to explain this.
Seeing it splits, because it's like some people will try to like rationalize it to the point where like they'll completely take out any odd part of it and just pretend like it never happened. And then on the flip
Yeah.
side, there's other people that will like specifically highlight the weird part about it and forget every other component to it. It's like, you know, you don't really think about it until you're in that moment, and you're not always in that moment. It's kind of like the whole thing with like, oh, you saw a Sasquatch, why didn't you take a picture? It's like when you're in that moment, you're not thinking about that. You're just thinking about what you're trying to do. But, you know, when you have these experiences, I try to view it as you want to try to collect as many details as possible that you can mentally in your own head on both sides. You know, you don't just want to highlight one feature of it. You want to scan and take in every possible component of it that you can. And I guess it kind of depends on how people's minds work, where I've always been one of those people that's like highly aware of everything in my surroundings. Like I'll observe everything from a distance. So if you're one of those people, you can kind of go, oh crap, and then scan everything and try to like connect everything. But, you know, you kind of have to like catch yourself in that moment and try to do yourself just, and at least try to collect anything that you can. You know, it's like the people that, you know, will see a Sasquatch and they'll remember how tall it was next to a tree. But because they remember just that one little piece, now they can go back later and they can say, all right, you know, it was 8 feet tall. Like this thing was 2 feet taller than most humans would be on average. Like there was something weird I was seeing here. But you have to give yourself the markers when you're in that moment. Even if you just collect one, it's like gives you at least a starting point to try to work with something.
Yeah. Did you have that same type of mentality? I don't know how young you were when you first experienced this, because you said they started pretty young, right?
They started like I'd probably say even earlier than 4. Like I honestly don't remember like not having them, and they were just a lot more continuous when I was a kid, and then as I started getting older, they kind of started to space out. And I'll still have these experiences once in a while. Like a couple of years ago, before my son was born, my girlfriend and I tried, and we ended up having a miscarriage. And in the process of it, it was just a lot of stuff going on, really emotional time. And after we had come out of it on the other side, I had this experience where I went to this place where best way to describe it, it looked like it was the middle of space, and I was inside of this like nebula, and it was kind of this like purpley color, and I wasn't really standing in it, but I wasn't really sitting in it. I was just kind of existing in it. And I saw this little kid that looked like me, around the age of like 6 or so. And he said, that wasn't a good vessel for me. I'll see you on the next one. And then a couple of weeks later, we figured out that, you know, she was like pregnant again. And I ended up figuring out a couple of months later that I was having a son. And I've tried to like mentally remember this image so that when he's around 6, I can connect it to see if I saw my son before he was born. But as of right now, as far as the characteristics go, like the round face, everything, like however somebody wants to try to explain it or rationalize it, like I am almost completely convinced that I somehow saw my kid before he was born through having one of these astral projections / sleep paralysis experiences. Because I would have chalked it up as a dream, but when I came back, I had a sleep paralysis experience, and that always seems to happen after I astral travel. But this was like one of the first and only times that I'd ever been to a place that I wasn't familiar with, because normally I was in the room, and if I went somewhere weird, I just assumed it was a dream. But I had sleep paralysis directly after that, and all the dots have connected so far. So it's like just a weird experience. Like they'll just happen when they want to. I've never had any kind of control over it. It's just, it happens when it happens.
But this was like a place that felt like you needed to be in that moment, like when that
I wondered if it was like almost like where consciousness is born, or like the universal consciousness, or where consciousness like cycles through. Like that's almost what it felt like, because I don't know why else I would just be in this place and this kid would just be like, that wasn't a good one, I'll see you in the next one. Like,
Yeah.
there wasn't anybody else there. It didn't feel like anybody else was there, but it didn't feel like scary. It kind of felt like this like warm, like embracing feeling like while I was there. So I've wondered again if like that might be what people refer to as like the universal consciousness, or like the place where like consciousness like recycles possibly. But either way, it was just another one of those experiences I'll never think I'll get to the bottom to until, you know, you're on the other side. But it's one of those ones that like I keep in my mind because it was weird enough that I needed reassurance for myself. And once my kid hits 6 or so, then I'll be able to completely confirm. But as of right now, like all the characteristics, all the features seem to be exactly the same, that it was him.
Yeah, I would imagine that one would stick out, especially if it was different from your other experiences. Like this was, like you said, a place that you've never been to. During any of those astral projection moments, this was completely different to you. So I would imagine that would just immediately lock into your brain. But that's pretty amazing. If it's like, I mean, the fact that he just was like, that wasn't a good vessel, but almost like don't worry, I'm gonna be there, you know.
And it was weird because after that, it's like, you know, if you go through one of those experiences, you always wonder like who that kid was gonna be, like what they were gonna be, and even if you end up having another one, it still like weighs on you and sits in the back of your mind. And after having that experience, it's like I've never wondered. Like it's just always felt like it was the same consciousness, same person, same being, and it was just, you know, that vessel wasn't a good one, so he came down on the next ride. Like it was one of those things that it came right when I needed it to. And maybe it's, you know, depending on how you view things, maybe like an act from God possibly, or, you know, the brain trying to rationalize itself and make itself feel better. But it was what I needed at the time. And I would have definitely chalked it up to just the brain's, like a version of a brain's coping mechanism. But just the image of him, I don't know how you would subconsciously like know what your kid's face was going to look like when you were 6, unless, again, it's something a bit more spiritual, because it's either one, it's like there's already an internal knowing which gets into the spiritual realm, or on the other side, you know, you saw your kid before you were born, which still exists within that same spiritual realm. Like there's something weird to it.
Yeah, that's amazing. Now you said you connected, by this time you already could connect the dots.
My son's 3 right now, but his facial features are exactly what I'd seen. But I got another 3 years before I can like hard set confirm it, because it's there to the point where I'm like, yes, I believe so, but I still need that 100% confirming moment for myself, which hopefully I'll get in about 3 more years.
Yeah. Wow. Now, what was it like as you're a child, if you can remember the ones where, like, since you said probably before 4, since you've been 4, these moments where you would have these astral projections and then sleep paralysis, because you said it would happen after each time, right? After every time you projected. And when you came back, you would go into paralysis.
Every single time, yep.
Okay. So how was it as a child? Because I know mine was just initially just fear.
See, when I got older, it definitely got into like more of a fear state when I was seeing like these like shadow people and these dark figures and stuff around me. But as a kid, it never really like felt like that. For a while, I kind of chalked it up as like when your consciousness or your soul or whatever you want to call it, your astral self leaves your body, it's almost like rebooting a computer, that when you come back, it has to like reconnect to all the different facets of it. So as a kid, it just kind of felt like that. It was like, you know, the computer's rebooting itself back up. There was never this like high moment of fear. It just felt like, you know, start off with your toes and then it would kind of go back up, and it was just like reconnecting and readjusting, like, or recalibrating rather, like your astral self back into like your physical self. But when you start getting to a point where you start seeing these like dark figures, then I definitely think that's a possibility. It's one of those things that we still, I mean, a lot of people have theories on it, but I don't think that we're ever going to hit like a definite, like, this is specifically what it is thing. But when you're seeing dark figures, that's when the fear kicks in, and that's when people have their freak out moments. And I've definitely had a lot of those. But as a kid, like, I never saw the shadow figures. It just kind of felt like, the best way I can describe it, I never saw like gnomes or anything, or like elves or anything, but you know, they're like mannerism where it's just these like playful, like little little people that feel like they exist around you, like they're just around the corner, like hee hee, like kind of watching you.
Okay,
Like it
yeah,
felt
I
like
get
that
what
as a
you mean.
kid. It was more of this like haha, like there's little creatures around me or something. Then as I got older, it got like darker where I don't know if they were like changing their image to like not scare a kid, or on the other side, if it was a different thing that was watching me at different points. But I've had a few mediums that I've talked to that have said that, again, depending on how much validity you put into this stuff, because I find it fascinating, but at the same time, it's still like I try to view things subjectively where I definitely find it fascinating, but I still want to find like a more grounded explanation to get myself to that point. But
Yeah.
I've had a couple of mediums say that like my specific thing that I'm supposed to be good at is like astral travel, but there's forces on the other side that knows that, again, in past lives, all this kind of stuff, that I was extremely proficient in it. So they have tried their best in this lifetime to make it so that they control the experience rather than I control the experience. And I've had a few mediums that have mentioned like once you learn how to control the experiences, then they won't be able to touch you. You'll be able to do whatever you want at that point. And I've even like tried to do this where I've tried to become like lucid in dreams. And I'll do this thing where I call it like turning the light on the back of the house, where I'll have like a night light and I'll put it in my like vision when I'm sleeping so that I'll have my eyes closed, but I can still see the light. So I like subconsciously kind of stay awake in the back of my mind. And every single time I become aware, I notice that I'm in the dream. I'm like, all right, I'm going to control it. All of a sudden, everything will go into high gear and I'll get blasted through space at this like ridiculously fast rate. And I realized quickly that that must be one of my main fears because it horrifies me and I end up throwing myself out of the dream. But it seems like whenever I've ever tried to control any of these experiences, something like that'll happen, that there's this resistance that like doesn't want me to have any control over, and they just want it to happen when it happens, and maybe on their own ground, maybe on their own time. But I know there's like this whole idea about these beings that'll basically find people that have stuff like that and try to like utilize them for whatever happens to be going on the other side. And I don't think I ever made it to that point where I became like good enough to do that, maybe, but definitely a point where maybe they were like checking me out for a while. But I mean,
Yeah.
even on the other
To the
side,
point
man,
where
if I don't remember any of my
actively trying to
dreams,
stop you.
exactly. Or even
Yeah.
on the other side, man, maybe I don't remember my dreams because I started doing something on the other side and they don't want me to remember. I mean, I don't know, man.
Yeah. No, it's weird that you bring that up because I mean, my fiance says it all the time. She's like, "Do you ever just take control of your dreams? Like, you just take control of it, like you're actively in a dream?" And I'm like, "No, I don't. I rarely remember mine." She's like, I always know when I'm in a dream, and I can just like I just will stop in the middle of it, and I'll go, "Oh, I'm dreaming right now." Okay, and then she'll like will have full control of what is happening in her dream, or she's aware of everything that is happening in her dream. And I'm like, I think you're one of like few people who can do that because
I know a handful of people that can do that, but like for the most part, it's like I don't know how they do that, man. Like I almost don't like sleeping because I just feel like I black out for a while. So I'll like sleep the minimum that I can. Usually I sleep about 3-4 hours a night because I just feel like I go to sleep and then I just wake up. Like there's no fun in the middle of it. It's just like I black out and now it's time to wake up and go to work. Like
that's how it is for me.
it's not any fun for me anymore.
Yeah, because she's just like, "You ever do that?" And I'm like, "I don't think everybody can do that." So, no.
And if you are, you're definitely a lucky person.
Yeah,
Especially if you can do it without like training to do it. Because a lot of people that can do that stuff, they've done a lot of research and like training to get to a point where they're able to do that.
No, hers is just like it's just normal for her. She says, like she just brought it up like it was just something that everybody can do.
She's got something special about her, man. She's just got to figure it out. Because I'm sure she's probably one of those people that maybe doesn't believe in the spiritual or something, and she just has this ability. And it's just like, oh yeah, it's just fun. It's just like,
Oh,
bro,
no, I
you
tell
don't
her that
realize
all
what
the
you're
time.
capable of.
I tell her that all the time because she can always feel when something is like not right, haunted, something she feels an energy somewhere. So, but she doesn't like it. It scares her, so she doesn't like to like dive into it.
I mean,
But
even
she'll go
on
on
like a less
investigations with me.
spiritual level, just like being aware of energies. I mean, I feel like some people have a high awareness of like energies and frequencies and everything going on around them. And I think that might play like a key factor in it is being attuned with maybe how we used to be at one point. And then once we started moving down this technological road, we kind of like pushed away from these natural abilities, but some people still have that special DNA coding where they can like pick up energies or something special about them, man.
Yeah, no, she definitely can. I mean, from the first, I mean, I won't get into it here. I'll do more on your show. I'll talk more when I go on to your show. But yeah, she definitely has those feelings. She'll always tell me, "Don't get that. It's haunted. Don't get that. I don't feel good from it." And I'll buy it anyways. But
That's the exact reason why I bought it, is because you told me it makes you
Yeah.
uncomfortable.
yeah, but that's how it is. I mean, that's why we have some of the haunted things. I'll bring it on for a show and tell when I go on to yours. But yeah, it's interesting the fact that you have had people who say like, "Oh yeah, this is just something you do. This is something you've done. Your spiritual side is just like in each lifetime or something. It's just like, all right, this is what
See, in
we
the
do."
mediums that I've heard this from, I'll do like a test with mediums where there's a lot of stuff that I don't say on the internet. And basically, before I kind of get on the bandwagon of like hearing everything that they're saying, like I'll hear people's stories all day, no problem. But when people start talking about me, like I need these like certain keys before I kind of start really like getting into it. And the few that have said that have been able to like name people in my family that I've never mentioned on podcasts before, talk about experiences I had as a kid without me ever talking about on the podcast before or anything on the internet. Like they drop these bombs, but the weird part is, on another level, I think they already know that, because it's weird. Like those ones that will like wow me, like the 1%, like the rest are charlatans, but that 1%, it's like they already know that you need that information because they're aware of their ability. So it's like you won't even ask them. They'll be like, "Oh, here's this, here's this, here's this. Can we get to the conversation now?" And I'm just like, "All right, you already answered my questions. I'm even saying nothing. Perfect. All right, what do you got for me?"
Oh man, yeah. How did it? I mean, because you've, I mean, obviously when it starts when you're young, you said it seemed playful. At what point did it start to change where you started to feel that sense of fear? Like you said, at a certain point, you did start to feel that.
See, I think it's kind of plays into a factor with like your emotions, what you're feeling at the time. And I think that it definitely imbalances your energy, for, again, lack of a better term for it, where they started getting dark around my teenage years. And teenage years for a lot of people are, when you're kind of figuring out your emotions, you're kind of figuring out yourself. Like, as much fun as some people have as a teenager, for a lot of other teenagers, it's a very dark period. So I think it was partially like a reflection of like what I was going through at the time, where, maybe as a kid I had this more optimistic, like happy energy. So it kind of drew in things that kind of had that same frequency, that same vibration. But once I started getting into the darker emotions when I was like a teenager, and, I was like the teenager that always wore black, was always like reading about like messed up stuff, like all that kind of stuff, it kind of just played a factor in it, where I then became an antenna for like negative energies versus positive energies, because that was my emotions and my outlook and everything on the time. And getting into the subconscious thing, because I definitely like studying psychology when it comes to a lot of this stuff, because I want to connect in the factors of like the human brain with all this type of stuff. And I mean, maybe something that you're seeing subconscious, I'm not saying these experiences aren't real, but maybe some of the stuff you see is direct reflections of things that are existing in your subconscious. But on the other side, it's definitely possible that like-minded energies draw like-minded energies, and that's why you see certain things at certain periods in your life.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. I mean, for me, it's just, I mean, for most people, it's when it's a high stress in time, like a stressful moment in their life, to where they're experiencing paralysis, these sleep paralysis, and when they're seeing like the Hat Man or these shadow creatures that they see. Most of the time, people are in a very deep moment of just stress or a negative mindset.
See, I've wondered if a lot of these things could also possibly link in with like UFO abduction experiences, and whether or not it's coming from the human side or the alien side of it. But it seems like those sleep paralysis moments are very reminiscent of UFO abduction experiences, where you're laying on your back flat on a table, you can't move, you have these dark figures around you, And I've wondered if, you'd start diving into screen memories. If it's possible that whether it's, again, something government or something extraterrestrial or interdimensional, if that also might possibly play a factor in it also.
Yeah. No, I've definitely had that theory pop into my head a couple of times. I've had people say, "You sure you weren't abducted at any point? Are you sure this didn't happen to you? Is this, I mean, it could be spiritual, but are you sure it wasn't
See,
an
I don't
abduction?"
rule out the abduction thing just because
Yeah.
it's like the experiences are so similar that maybe it's just different viewpoints of the same events and people kind of just experience it in different ways.
Yeah.
But, I don't draw out the possibility, especially if you have continued experiences with this stuff. Again, it even just makes it that much closer to being reminiscent of alien experiences. And I've had a good handful of people that heavily research this stuff that have said that they have never had an experience, but then they'll talk to contactees that'll be like, "You were there, you were on the ship," and they'll be like, I don't remember ever being there. And then they'll start diving into like screen memories and everything like that. And like I had one guy who was talking about how he almost got hit by this blue car when he was a kid. And when he started doing like regressions and stuff like that, he basically realized that he had had a UFO experience at that time and that he didn't almost get hit by a blue car. That was like the moment where the experience and the encounter happened, and they basically put the screen memory over the blue car because once he started going down these regressions, and it wasn't one of the ones where, somebody kind of feeds the ideas. It's more like they get you in that hypnotic place and then they just let you talk. And he basically said that he flipped the memory and he didn't see the blue truck anymore. Like there was something there that came and scooped him.
Man. Yeah.
Sometimes you got to
Those
break
are-
that programming, man. I think it's in
Yeah.
layers too, where it's like you'll break one layer and then there's another layer and then there's another layer because it's like you got to have your escape proof, man. Because, I mean, perfect example, there's an X-Files episode where one person was saying that they were having like alien experiences and then they screen memoried it back and realized that it was government officials that were using screen memories of like aliens. So, I mean, what not a
It all
perfect
goes
layer?
back to
Like,
the government.
yeah, I mean, even doubling back from there, man, it's
Yeah.
like aliens are aliens. They have their screen memory and they make you think you're seeing aliens, right? But then they know that you're going to dive into it, so then it goes back to humans. But then there's another layer where it goes back to them again. So it's like, they hide themselves in plain sight. It definitely seems like psychologically that would trick somebody enough to work,
Yeah, no, 100%. Now, was there any because I don't know if there was more than the sleep paralysis experiences that you had. I mean, you said they still happen recently to the point where
Not as sporadic as they used to, but every 6 months, I'd say I probably have like one or two experiences where I end up having sleep paralysis.
Yeah, and has there been anything else? I mean, you've had the astral projection, sleep paralysis. You've had, that run-in with the thing that appeared after you've taken things from the building that you guys were exploring, and then the reptilian. Has there been anything else that has kind of happened to you that just racked your brain to the point where you're like,
Well, I got one more really good one for you that I can share. That kind of is why I've connected things so much into like this whole like quantum physics kind of realm. Kind of connecting with another like sleep paralysis experience. There was one time that I ended up going to sleep like normal, but when I woke up, I was in this other place, and it looked almost like a different reality. Like it was like a different dimension. And I was trying to find my girlfriend and I couldn't find her, and I ended up finding her, but it wasn't quite her. It was like this different variation of her. So I was like, all right, this is a dream. So I go to sleep and then I wake up and then I'm in another reality. And I knew that it wasn't quite the one that was like my reality. So I go through and I try to find my girlfriend, and I had this like continuation of basically going to sleep and doing that. And it felt like I was gone for about 6 months. And, previous to this, I've read about people having these like weird time slip experiences. So I kind of got to a point where it literally felt like it was 6 months of me going to sleep every night and trying to find my girlfriend and waking up in all these different realities. So I got to the point where I like didn't know if I was going to make it home. I didn't know if this was an astral projection experience, if it was a dream, like what it was. But all I knew was that the time duration was not right for what I was experiencing. So I got to a point where I almost like learned to like accept it. Like I knew that I felt like I was just going to wake up in a new place every day and this was just going to be my life from then on. And then I ended up waking back up into, I'm hoping, like, is the reality that I originally came from. And I turned over, and I'm not a very emotional guy, and I see my girlfriend laying there, and I just like know it's her. I can like feel that it's her, and I start tearing up. And this was right after I came back, and I had like sleep paralysis. So I'm like sitting there, and I'm just like, all right, where am I? And then I turn my head and I see her, and then I have that like moment of like, oh my god, I'm back.
Yeah.
And after that, it was like I started really, really diving into like multiple theories on what reality might be, if we're living in some type of like organic simulation, if there's like layers to reality, all of that. Because it's like after that experience, I don't know, it's one of those experiences where you can't find anything solid to try to connect or try to really like understand it or try to figure it out or even really like talk to other people about it without, just having like your one viewpoint or one perspective on it. But it's like really hard to explain to somebody that I literally felt like I went through 6 months in one night. And I don't know, time duration, time works differently in other realities and stuff. Like, I don't know. I still have not gotten to the bottom of that, but that was probably like one of the most traumatic and emotional experiences I'd ever had with, even if you want to call it astral projection, I don't know. It felt like I was physically there, but like I said, this is like my one specific experience that I have no idea what direction to go with in it. So people ask about it, I'll like tell the experience, but I have not gotten to like any basis of like what I could possibly even think this might even be besides either one, just a really, really bizarre dream, or two, dimension hopping seems to be possible. And I mean, people talk about time slip experiences enough that I definitely think it's possible for you to slide into other dimensions or other realities that are layered on top where you're in the same place, but like you're in a different layer. It's like hard to explain. They're not stacked on top of each other. They're all kind of coexisting within the same time and space, but just somehow layered differently.
Yeah. No, I can imagine it being just traumatic in its own way, because I think with when people have these dreams that feel real, when they're like, man, that dream felt real. I felt like I already like was waking up and getting my day started, and then I woke up. But yours it felt like 6 months. This didn't feel like you dreamt a day, and at the same time you felt like you were almost trapped in that continuous loop of
Made me
just
really,
having
really appreciate my girlfriend, because it's like
Yeah.
I just wanted to get back to her. That was like all I wanted to do. Like, so I'm not a very emotional person, dude, and I like literally started like bawling my eyes out when I got back to her because I
Yeah.
never thought I'd ever see like her as I knew her again.
Yeah. No, I can imagine that, especially because it'd be like the biggest weight lifted off of your shoulders in that moment. You're like, I can breathe now. Like
Especially at the point
I
where you
got you.
basically felt like you gave up and you're just like,
Yeah.
this is my life now.
Yeah. Now, wow. Yeah, I've never heard anything I mean, I've heard things like that, but I haven't spoke with somebody who has
That was probably
experience.
my last one that has been anything like substantial or solid. Like I've had sleep paralysis and everything since then. I don't remember the dream or the astral projection experience before that. I just remember waking up and having the sleep paralysis. But that was my last like big one that I remember completely vividly. And that happened probably 3 years ago, I'd say.
Wow. Yeah, I don't think I would. I think it probably would have been the same. I would have probably reacted the same way. Because what do you do in that moment where you just feel like you're trapped in a loop? Especially what feels like 6 months.
You just learn to accept it. It's like,
Yeah.
you don't know, because it's almost like Groundhog's Day. It's like if you were trying to figure out how to get back, you need time to do it. You wouldn't be able to do it in a 24-hour period. So it's like if you wake up and you're in a whole new place, another reality the following day, it's like unless you're figuring out and like mapping the stuff out in your head, it's like even if you're theoretically had to build a machine to get back, like you wouldn't be able to do it because as soon as you go to sleep, you'd be somewhere else again.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow, I can't imagine that. I mean, I've had moments where like a dream felt real, but nothing to that extent to where I felt
I've never had a more vivid dream in my entire life. Like
Yeah.
that was the most vivid dream I've ever had.
Yeah, to the point where you had an emotional response to waking up finally. Yeah. So I completely sympathize with what you were feeling in that moment. But I mean, I think that's a perfect, experience to like. I mean, if anybody has ever experienced that, if you're watching, listening, then definitely
get back to me. I want to hear about it.
Yeah. Yeah,
I want to
share
see if there's
your
connecting
experience
dots or something, like certain types of people or certain mindsets. Like, I haven't come across anybody else who's had an experience like that. So if there is anybody out there, please contact me so we can hopefully get to some type of ground to start kind of digging into it a bit.
Yeah. I think that's a perfect segue into just letting people know where they could find you, where they can get your content, get in contact with you, if you want to let everybody know that.
So if anybody is looking for open conversation style interviews, you guys can go and check out my solo show. That one is Inquiries of Our Reality with Shayn Jones. You can find it on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, literally any podcatcher you search it on, you can find it. And then my other show, Bizarre Encounters, which is the deep dive style show. Currently, we're diving a little bit more into interviews just because of some stuff that's going on with my co-host with work and stuff, but we'll be back to the deep dive soon enough if anybody goes and checks out that feed. But that's Bizarre Encounters with Shayn and Oren. And then I also do now it's going to be a YouTube live show. It was originally just like a short form show that we do every couple weeks, but now we're kind of expanding it a bit where we, taking articles, taking questions from listeners, taking clips. We discuss them, give our thoughts and ideas on it. And that show is called Bizarre Inquiries. I know our first live one that'll be on YouTube is going to be on January 23rd if anybody wants to go check that out. But that's just my YouTube live show. But if anybody wants to look anything up, I keep everything under Open Minds Media to try to keep everything under one link so everybody come and find it. And that one is linktr.ee/open_minds_media. But if you guys want to find a specific show, Inquiries of Our Reality, Bizarre Encounters, look it up on Google, and at least Inquiries of Our Reality, I know that I should be pretty much everything on that Google feed, so you guys will find me. Just look around on the internet, and you guys will find me.
Yeah, plus I'll throw all your links and everything so that people can find you in the show note, the bio of the show, this episode. And I want to say this conversation has been dope, man. I really like this conversation. It went in a bunch of different ways, but that's the way I like it. So I mean, like, it was a killer conversation, I think.
Well, I appreciate that, man. Like I said, I don't go on this side of the mic too often, so I'm glad that at least I could make it sound good, because I always it always feels weird, man. Like, if you're always the person that's the host on the show, you're usually the one asking the questions. It's like when you get the seats flipped on you, man, it's like you're like, I guess I could talk about this, and then I feel like I shoot off in a million different directions because that's how my mind works. But
nah, I think it was killer, man. It was killer. And for everybody watching, listening, don't forget to ask questions and face your fears. Thanks for joining me and Shayn on this episode of Induced Fear.